Welcome to Brainwaves, a weekly forum where we discuss the psychological challenges we're all facing in the world today, with leaders in the mental health field about brain science and the real life experiences they have surrounding timely issues in the popular psyche. I'm Brandon Staglin. Thank you so much for watching today and participating. Feel free to drop questions in the Facebook Live chat window during the premiere of the show. We'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can online. I started this webcast 9 years ago. As a survivor of schizophrenia, I felt it was important for the public to understand the very real hope inherent in the groundbreaking science being done every year by one mind-funded scientist, developing new treatments for people who struggle with brain health challenges. I also wanted people who struggle to understand the very real prospect of recovery as modeled by stories of those who have recovered and have hope based on both those things. Today's topic is youth mental health. We're starting to see results from some of the latest studies coming back in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're seeing, as expected, a surge in distress all across the United States. While the surge shows up among all age groups and demographics, we see that it's predominantly in youth, a group in which anxiety and depression were already at alarming levels before the pandemic began, that we see the greatest levels of distress being reported. In fact, in a study conducted by Florida State University and San Diego State University, preliminary results from April showed that an astonishing 82% of young people reported levels of distress ranging from moderate to severe. Here with us to discuss how young people are faring, Dr. Kate McLaughlin is a clinical psychologist. She's also an assistant professor at Harvard University in psychology. She's a 2015 One Mind Rising Star awardee, and her research focuses on how stressful life events, adverse experiences, and social disadvantages affect adolescent mental health. Also with us is Nadia Ghaffari, executive director and founder of teenstalk.org, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping young people through building mental health supports through open conversation, peer-to-peer support, and storytelling. She's also a student at UC Berkeley and author of the children's book, Growing a Brain, Story Resiliency Starting in the Classroom. And with us today as well is a superb young musician. He's just released, he's going to perform a song from his album released in 2017, Midnight Highway, at the end of our conversation today. And with us is Quinn Sullivan. Quinn and Katie and Nadia, thanks to all of you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's going to be a great conversation. Thanks for being with me today. So we'll start in with the questions. Katie, shall I call you Kate or Katie, which is more comfortable for you?
You can call me Kate, thanks.
Okay, Kate it is. Kate, some would argue that the current crisis has been felt more acutely by teenagers than any other age group. The schedules and rituals upended, learning remotely, and rites of passage postponed or even canceled, and in many cases, shouldering more of the family household burdens. What is the emotional impact you see of all this upheaval?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the current situation is one that is inherently defined by an increase in stress for all of us, for most people, right? So when we think about stress, what that means is confronting a situation where the demands of that situation outweigh your abilities to cope. That's sort of the classic definition of stress. And there are so many aspects of our current situation that meet that definition, right? The uncertainty involved, the lack of knowledge about how long this will persist, the helplessness many people feel about protecting themselves and loved ones and about the future and what's going to happen. And so, given that high burden of stress we're all experiencing, it's not surprising that levels of anxiety, depression, and distress are increasing pretty much across the board, right? We know that there's this powerful relationship between experiencing stress and the likelihood that you experience distress and symptoms of anxiety and depression. And so this kind of increase in mental health problems is kind of expected given the burdens that everybody is facing. There's some aspects of this situation that are particularly likely, stressors that are particularly likely to trigger things like anxiety and depression. So anxiety is often related to situations where we feel a lack of control and where there is a legitimate threat, either to our well-being or to our health. And so, the pandemic really presents kind of a classic situation of uncontrollable threat, where there's something dangerous in the environment. We don't have a lot of control over our ability to protect ourselves or to know whether we're going to be exposed or others we love might be exposed or be harmed by it. And then there's also situations that involve loss, right? We've had tens of thousands of people die in the United States alone. And so, the loss of loved ones is an enormous stressor, something that's very strongly related to depression. But getting to your question, I promise I'm getting there. There's many other kinds of losses that are happening. Loss of jobs, obviously, and the many, many people who are facing unemployment, but loss of important identities. So for high school students, for teenagers, for college students, sort of identity as a student, the place you hold, whether it's on campus or at your school as an athlete or as a musician or whatever it might be, the sort of access to these valued identities that we all hold has been cut off for a lot of people. Again, is an enormous stressor that many people are facing. So when we think about what about this is particularly hard on adolescents, I think there's a few things that are important. So the first is that so much of adolescents' identities are sort of wrapped up in their relationships with peers and their relationships at school. This is sort of their primary venue for social interaction outside their families, and much of their identities are sort of defined in the roles that they hold at school and with their peers. We also know that those kinds of relationships, peer relationships, are incredibly important during adolescence. So there's this real shift that happens from sort of the most important people being your family to the most important people being your peers. And the degree to which you're able to engage with peers, feel supported by them, is very strongly related to mental health during adolescence. And so what's happened in this crisis is that, teenagers have faced this uncontrollable situation. They've been cut off from their many sources of support that they receive, whether it's teachers or peers at school, and in any number of other activities that they routinely engage in. So they're confronting this stress in the absence of what we know is one of the most powerful stress buffers, which is social support, the ability to connect with other people that are important to you. And so I think, the combination of those things, plus one final factor, which is just that, adolescence is a time where people are really learning how to cope with stress and adversity. A lot of adolescence is actually characterized by an enormous increase in stress relative to childhood. So you see very consistently that teenagers report experiencing more stressful life events, finding life to be more overwhelming than children. And so they're just developing the coping strategies for learning how to navigate those stressors adaptively and effectively. And so this is sort of a culmination of high stress during a period of time when teenagers are still learning how to cope with those stressors. And the nature of the stressor has removed one of the most powerful sources of support that they have, which is peers and their school relationships. So I think all of those things contribute to why this is such a difficult situation, and one that is contributing to a lot of mental health difficulties for teenagers.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of a double hit, both additional stress and the lack of support caused by the stressor, by the pandemic, and kind of a trial by fire for so many young people. It's a tough time. Nadia, let's hear from you now. Tell us about the genesis of Teens Talk. Why did you start this online sharing forum?
So I started Teens Talk in my sophomore year of high school after one of my close friends attempted suicide. And after seeing the many barriers to speaking out about mental health and finding resources for young people in general, these barriers were making young people feel even more isolated and lost. And so I was striving to create a youth-led, youth-driven platform that would normalize conversations around mental health and strive to harness those peer-to-peer connections around practices of self-care and building resilience. Teens Talk basically breaks the stigma around mental health through spreading awareness about resources and through open conversation and storytelling. We also have our Teen Wellness Conference as a way to bring these conversations to a live, safe space. And we really emphasize the message to young people that they are not alone and that help and hope are real.
That's fantastic. And you've had how many conferences so far? Is it 3 or?
3, yes.
Yeah, I wish I could have gone to one that you invited me to in 2017, but thank you so much for the invitation. I hope to go to a future one and see what it's all about. But do you find that the teens respond better to teens delivering messages of help and hope than coming from adults?
Yes, definitely. It's kind of what was mentioned about the power of peers during adolescence. And I really think that seeing other young people that are going through similar experiences and that you can really relate to, that is very powerful.
Yeah, I get it. Building a tribe. Teens Talk is a platform for teens worldwide. Have you noticed a difference between the mental health experiences that you've heard about from teens in America versus those coming from teens other parts of the globe, both before and then now during the pandemic?
So there are obviously differences that result from geographically being in a different place. For example, differences in what resources are available, how to access them, what the cultural norms are. However, the empowering and uniting aspect to Teens Talk is that youth from all over the world actually have many underlying similarities when it comes to their experiences with facing mental health challenges and working toward overcoming them. Mm-hmm. With the mental health challenges that may stay, so basically mental health challenges may stem from different causes or different stressors, but we almost all have had experiences with mental health adversity. And on Teens Talk, we have youth voices represented on our website from over 20 different countries and also many different states across the US. And especially during this pandemic, we're seeing young people unite over their experiences with stress and anxiety around the unknown. And one of the strongest ways I've actually seen this being done is through a lot of memes and jokes on young people's social media accounts, basically making light of the pain that we're all facing, making light of bizarre circumstances such as online school or online college, and doing this as an outlet of release. Teens Talk also recently started a Youth Voices campaign on our social media and our website, where young people worldwide are sharing how they are taking care of their mental health during this time. And again, this is harnessing that sense of positive peer influence that can be both uniting and empowering.
That's awesome. And these internet memes you mentioned a minute ago, do you find that these resonate like equally well in teams from different parts of the world? And this is showing that there's those common underlying resonant experiences.
I think there are obviously a range of memes that I've seen, but a lot of them are around the similar causes, like, for example, having to just socially interact, like people are doing like Zoom socials, or just knowing that classes are online. All of those are kind of underlying foundational changes that this pandemic has caused. And there are definitely, people who are trying to kind of laugh about that, the pain that that's bringing, and using that as like a release. And it's definitely, there are a lot of similarities across the board.
Yeah, that makes sense. People say we're all in this together, and it's true based on the experiences you're relating. Thank you. Katie, while young people seem to have lower rates of infection and seem to have better outcomes if they do contract the virus, many American teens work in low-wage, high-risk jobs. And basically, how can they be resilient in the face of this added stress and vulnerability during this time?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I just want to applaud Nadia and say that I find it very inspiring what she's done to promote resilience with her organization with this sort of youth-led approach. I think it's really amazing. And I'll talk a little bit about it's awesome. So when we think about resilience, whether it's needing to be resilient in the face of, working at a grocery store and fearing being infected, or, suddenly having to take your classes online while caring for younger siblings, while parents are also working remotely. And there's just a range of things that teenagers are facing right now. And, one of my favorite facts about resilience is actually a quote from a scientist who is one of the leaders in the study of resilience. Her name is Ann Maston. She's a professor at the University of Minnesota. And what she calls sort of the ingredients of resilience is ordinary magic. And the idea that she's trying to convey is that there are many different paths to resilience, right? There's no one magic bullet that we all, need to look to figure out how to be resilient in the face of adversity. There are, many things that we can highlight that science suggests promote adversity, that we all have access to in various ways. So a key one that I've already mentioned is social support. It's a particularly challenging one right now, given our social distancing, but there are many creative and unique ways to try to foster support and social connection, whether it's through Zoom or through other digital platforms. But one of the other things I love to mention about the science of social support is that we often think about kind of receiving support from others as being the most pivotal resilience building characteristic, but there's actually really good evidence that shows that giving support to other people. This is also why I love, what Nadia is doing with her organization, that being there for others, giving support to other people is just as stress buffering or stress reducing as receiving support. So there's this amazing study that shows that the link between stress and adverse health outcomes, we know that is reduced, that relationship, in people who have high social support or who receive support from others. But what the study showed is that the stress buffering effect is just as much in people who give support to other people. So one of my favorite things that I've seen during the pandemic is, yes, we're all experiencing stress, but many of us have used this as an opportunity to mobilize, to be there for people in our community, whether it's, going grocery shopping for an elderly neighbor. You see stories of high school students who, play musical instruments, who no longer can do their, end of the year performances, who are going to nursing homes and playing for residents who are isolated in their rooms because of COVID outbreaks in the nursing homes. And there's ways that all of us can think about what we can do to give to others in our community. And we know that those behaviors will also be good for us in terms of buffering us from the negative effects of stress. And there's many, many other things, whether it's, physical activity and playing sports, learning how to meditate or use mindfulness, music, which we were talking about before the recording started, and which I think we'll get into a little bit later when we hear from Quinn. There are many different sources of resilience, and there's none that are sort of universally helpful for everyone. What's important is figuring out what works for you, and finding those sources of resilience you can look to in your own life, whether it's friends, a favorite hobby, being there for other people, relaxation and meditation, and looking to those strategies right now and using them as intentionally as possible, knowing that we all need to kind of buffer against the effects of the stressors we're all facing right now.
That's such great suggestions. Thank you, Kate, for all those ideas, and it makes a lot of sense. It resonates with me too. I think one additional thing people can consider for maintaining resilience is having a sense of purpose, and that kind of ties in with doing things for other people. And the idea that as long as we understand the why, we can deal with just about any how. That's a quote that I heard recently, and that's something that kind of gives me a lot of solace doing things like this webcast to help hopefully bring some solace and good ideas to people out there to manage their stress. So thank you for
absolutely.
Those great ideas.
Can I say one other thing as well, which is something we were all talking about, I think, before the recording started. So I teach this class at Harvard called The Science of Stress. And one of the classes I teach is about resilience. And so when I teach that class, I teach my students about these extraordinary people who have overcome just remarkable adversity. People like Elizabeth Smart, who was abducted as a young person and now runs a victims' rights organization. Liz Murray, who is the sort of homeless to Harvard story. She was a homeless teenager who basically put herself through high school and ended up at Harvard. These remarkable people who have overcome extreme adversity and thrived. But what's so fascinating about their stories is when you look at the characteristics of these people that contributed to their resilience, it's this ordinary magic. They're things that are available to all of us, whether it's, a relationship with a close neighbor who helped, or simply being optimistic and being committed to changing your life for the better. And so one thing I really want to highlight as well is the importance of hope and optimism right now, and that it can feel very easy to get sucked into negative thinking and pessimism about our future, where things are going, how long this is going to last. But I think encouraging optimism and hope that things not only are going to resolve, but that maybe there are lessons to be learned in this crisis that will make us a stronger society and better people on the other side, I think is something we can all do that may help to promote resilience.
Thanks, Katie. That's profound. What advice do you have for parents who either financially or through job loss or due to working long hours on the front lines during the pandemic are unable to provide or care for their children the way they'd like to or should right now? Is there any way to lessen the damage of these traumatic experiences for young people during these times?
Yeah, I mean, I think, all of the previous suggestions that I mentioned apply equally to, to young people as they do to adults in terms of strategies that can foster resilience. But, another message I think that's really important is the importance of self-compassion right now. We have this sense that we should always kind of be doing okay, and that we should push problems aside and be working really hard to kind of, keep our mental health in a positive place. And of course we want to do that. But I think it's also okay to recognize that we are facing sort of unprecedented challenges right now. And it's normal to feel distressed, right? We're all stressed out. We're all feeling anxious about the future. We've all experienced loss of some kind. And so being compassionate towards ourselves and understanding that it's okay to have distress. It's a common and, perhaps universal experience in the context of the current crisis. And, being kind to ourselves in the way that we would be kind to friends is something that isn't actually easy for people. So in my class on stress at Harvard, we teach the students various stress management strategies. And the last one they learn is self-compassion. And it's interesting because it's one of the most challenging strategies for people to use. It's based on research by this woman named Kristen Neff at Stanford, who's done a lot of pioneering work on this idea of self-compassion. But the basic idea is treating yourself the way that you would treat a close friend when you're experiencing trouble or feeling overwhelmed or even just having a bad day. When other people and close loved ones experience that, we want to reach out and support them, be kind to them, but we're often hard on ourselves when we experience those same challenges. And so the idea is applying that same kindness and compassion that we do to other people to ourselves. And I think it's an important message right now that it's okay to be distressed. It's okay that we can't do everything exactly the way we want to right now. It's impossible, in fact. And so cutting ourselves some slack and being compassionate and kind to ourselves, I think, is an important message for parents right now, especially.
Yeah, that is such an important message. And the idea of caring for yourself as much as in the same way you care for other people, that's such a great message to give. And it kind of makes me think of something that my grandmother used to say, we are our own severest critic. And so the idea that we don't need to do that just by noting that, I think that's important to remember. So Nadia, what advice do you give your peers and what advice do they give each other for how to cope with the stresses that they're all likely facing right now?
So this question actually reminds me of a message of hope that a young person shared on Teens Talk recently. And that is one of the most important things to remember is that all pandemics and disasters eventually come to an end. In the meantime, the most important thing to focus on is what you can control and let go of the rest. So I've seen my peers sharing self-care ideas and practices with each other, such as sending reminders to go outside if you can, or doing something active. And this sharing of self-care ideas can be very helpful. Another piece of advice I would say is that whatever you are feeling during this time, even if it's a messy mixture of emotions, that is fully and entirely valid. I think it's important to constantly reiterate the importance of social connections right now. Even if we must be physically distancing to stop the spread of the virus, we cannot forget being socially connected and staying in touch with our friends, family, and loved ones. So I would say check in with each other and check in often.
Yeah, that's great. And the idea you're talking about caring for each other, well, caring for ourselves, kind of like what Katie was saying a moment ago, that fits there too. And I'm glad that the teens generally are recognizing that as well. So that's hopeful to hear. Thank you. So we're talking today about youth mental health with Nadia Ghaffari, who's founder and executive director of teenstalk.org, a nonprofit dedicated to improving mental health supports for teens, and Dr. Kate McLaughlin, who's clinical psychologist at Harvard University and also assistant professor of psychology at Harvard. And this is brought to you by One Mind. If you'd like to learn more about One Mind, please visit onemind.org. Kate, there's no end in sight to the pandemic. This crisis will likely be affecting young people for months or perhaps years to come. And in some ways, it's a harbinger for some of the environmental and disasters that we see increasing in the world today due to changes in the climate, and this generation will have to deal with in future years. What are the long-range psychological implications from all of these stressors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, to the points that I raised earlier, we know very definitively when we look at data on natural disasters or terrorist attacks, these kinds of mass stressors that are sort of communal in the sense that they're experienced by many people at the same time, is that exposure to the stressors associated with these kinds of events is associated with increased mental health problems. However, the most common trajectory after even very severe stressors, even things like losing a partner to a chronic disease or even a child, the most common trajectory is actually one of resilience, where initially we see kind of an increase in mental health problems, distress, anxiety, depression, with a quick kind of return to baseline. And this work has been done by a researcher named George Bonanno at Columbia, where he's shown repeatedly after things like 9/11, as well as personal traumas like being in a car accident or losing a loved one, that by far the most common response is resilience. And so I think, while it's completely normal for all of us to feel distressed and stressed out right now, that I think what we will see among young people is what we continue to see over and over again, which is that most people will exhibit resilience. And in fact, there's this really amazing research that shows that experiencing a little bit of stress is actually a good thing, right? So when stress gets too extreme, we know it's harmful to mental health. But what's interesting is that when people experience almost no stress or very, very low levels of stress, you actually see pretty high rates of mental health problems in those people as well. And it's actually people who are kind of somewhere in the middle, who show the best mental health, who have the best functioning in life. And the idea is that having to cope with challenges and adversity helps make us stronger. And it helps us to build skills so that when something like this happens again in the future, hopefully not another pandemic, but some stressor will happen again to all of us, right? Life is a series of challenges and stressors that we all have to overcome. And that each time we successfully navigate one, we develop skills, a sense of mastery, a sense of control, the idea that we can manage this. We've managed things before. And I'm actually very hopeful that what this pandemic will do is instill a sense of hope and optimism in ourselves, that if we can overcome this as individuals and as a society, what can't we tackle together? And that it will build resilience, the experience of coming through this. And so I don't want to be, I want to remain optimistic about the sort of what things will likely look like in the future in terms of mental health for young people, because this is really an opportunity for us to learn how to cope with adversity.
That's such a wonderful message. It's like the growth mindset we were talking about before. If you understand that you can grow from your experiences, then that lets you know that you're going to get through this and you'll continue to grow going forward and keep learning and growing from your experiences. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah. Something Nadia was talking about a little bit earlier too. Nadia, of course, you're a young person, a college student. What is your outlook on all this?
I think for me, like many of my peers, this was very unexpected, and it provoked a lot of anxiety around just there being so many unknowns, especially at first. As students, we had to quickly adapt and adjust to virtual learning, which for so many reasons is not an ideal learning environment. And many college students nationwide had to pack up and leave to go home. And I know this was especially difficult for students who may not have had a place to go at the time. The pandemic definitely led to so many changes, and all of them happening so quickly, which led to widespread fears among students around how graduating seniors are going to find jobs amidst this economy, how students will graduate on time, how classes will be evaluated for this term, how financial aid will be distributed, and just in general, how our college experience, both socially and academically, will be completely disrupted by this pandemic. I think there are still a lot of completely valid concerns, and many students are anxiously awaiting to see what will happen with school in the fall. But personally, I find the message of resilience really hopeful, and I think I definitely believe in that. And it's something that we must remind ourselves that how, really strong and resilient we can be in the face of all this. And if we can overcome this, then really we have developed skills to overcome anything.
Thank you. That's an awesome message as well. And when you're talking about the message of resilience, what are some of the crucial components that we should all know about teen mental well-being and how teens can stay mentally well? Is resilience a major part of that?
I think resilience is a very big part of this. And I also think it's crucial right now. I think this was sort of mentioned before, but to be flexible and to check in often. So I know one thing that has been helpful for me and my peers is just the flexibility of expectations during this time, whether around school, productivity, or life in general. It's really important to be flexible and adapt to the changing circumstances and reiterate to young people how they can reach out for help or support during this time if they need extra support. And also that message of self-compassion is really important.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree in that, like when I was young, I remember I was very kind of like wanting to see the world in black and white terms and like wanting everything to go well and how I wanted to go. I remember talking to a friend in college saying, I wish I could control everything. And he said back to me, I have a job for you, Brandon. World domination. We had to laugh about that, but you can't control everything. But just recognizing that, is something that kind of maybe help people to move on and focusing on things that they can control and continuing to learn and grow from what they can do. Thank you. And Kate, what do we as a society need to better support the mental well-being of teens?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that this idea that we need to be intentional about supporting one another right now applies to teenagers in the same way it applies to thinking about, an older neighbor or somebody who's having a hard time with groceries, and that, it's incredibly important for us to be compassionate, not only to ourselves, but to other people, and thinking about the many challenges that all of us are facing right now. So I think, the most important things that we can do are, as Nadia suggests, checking in often to see how people are doing, to connect, rather than assuming that, checking in with teens is going to be perceived as an annoyance. Simply the message that I'm here for you if you need to talk. What is your experience like? How can I help right now from adults? I think can be incredibly empowering. Even if adolescents don't really want to talk to adults right now, simply that message that I'm here if you need me. I'm here to emotionally support you. I want to understand what you're going through. I think can be very helpful. And it's easy, for adults who have so many things on their plates right now, whether it's, suddenly having to take care of kids while trying to work remotely at home, or suddenly facing job loss or income loss that was completely unexpected. It's easy to kind of lose sight of the very real challenges that teenagers and young people are experiencing right now. So simply, acknowledging that, being an open ear to listen to what they have to say about how this is affecting them, I think is one thing we can all do to support the young people in our lives. And then I think, just being aware that sometimes teenagers are going to need more support than just these sort of ordinary sources of resilience that exist in our natural environments. And so knowing kind of when it might be a good time to think about checking in with a mental health professional or reaching out for additional support is incredibly important. And right now, the mental health field has rapidly shifted to strategies for providing mental health resources online in the very forum we're using right now. And there's all kinds of new opportunities to still be able to connect with mental health resources, even when we can't sit down face to face with one another. And so I think there's lots of ways to find those resources online, and just being aware that teenagers, like all of us, may need more support right now than is usual, and being kind of an advocate for helping to connect them to those resources.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And so finally, Nadia, to sum up, Nadia and then Katie, briefly, what are the key takeaways you'd like viewers to remember about youth mental health and the essential supports that they need during the pandemic?
So I would just repeat the importance of checking in. I also think sharing resources and making them easily accessible, because often they may be difficult to find, especially for someone who's already feeling distressed. And lastly, I would say remind young people of our strength and our resilience, and spread messages of hope that together we will get through this. I think just hearing that is very valuable, and spreading that so that it can become a reality.
That is so valuable. And you're talking about resources and helping people know there are resources available. Do you know of good, easy sites to visit that can provide resources? Like, does teenstalk.org offer ideas on that?
So Teens Talk has sort of like a page, a hub of resources that we have collected over time. And they include a wide range of outlets that are already pre-existing, and we just kind of link them there as like a collected area to access them. But in general, I think, well, going there can be a great starting point to see what is out there. We've tried to sort of narrow them down and only include like the most professional and the most helpful that we think will be the most helpful for young people. I've also just, as a quick one resource that I think is good, is the crisis text line. Especially for young people, it's very easy to just text the number and just immediately be connected to a real live person who is a trained counselor. And I've had friends and myself, I've used this not necessarily if it's like a crisis, but even if it's just trying to find a certain resource that I'm looking for, trying to have a conversation about something that maybe I don't want to have with, you know, a real person in my life, someone who's a little bit more removed. Just knowing that you can do that is really valuable. And I think one thing that they say is like anything that's a crisis to you is a crisis to us. So it's really, that's just one example of something that you can reach out to if you need it. There are many other great examples of this, and a lot of them are included on the Teens Talk resource page.
Thanks for noting that one. And the crisis text line to reach you, text home to 741-741. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to know there are sources of support out there, even for people who may not have a lot of social connection or just want to talk to somebody who's not in their social circle for whatever reason. That makes sense. And Kate, what are the key takeaway points you'd like people to remember about teen mental health and the supports that teens can benefit from?
Yeah, I have I guess a few. I think the first is that, you know, we know that stress is going to increase risk for mental health problems across the board, but we have some evidence to suggest that's particularly true for teenagers. And so we can all expect to, you know, that the young people in our lives are going to be experiencing distress right now. And that's normal, given the stresses we're all facing. I think the second take home is that despite the enormous burdens we all face right now and the challenges, resilience is by far the most common outcome, right? And that is a message that's hopeful and optimistic. And that what we can do, the third, to support young people is to help them find the most valuable sources of resilience in their own lives. And that's going to be different for everybody. One thing we can all do is provide more support and reach out to connect with the young people in our lives, to let them know that we're there, and to encourage them not only to sort of receive that social support, but to think about ways that we can give back to others, because we know how powerful that is as a source of resilience. There are many, many other sources of resilience that each of us kind of can latch onto in our own lives, but I think a very consistent one is a sense of optimism. And so I think maintaining hope that this situation will improve, and that in some ways it can make all of us stronger. The process of learning how to cope with this adversity, I think, is a very important message for young people.
Thank you. That's so powerful. And you were saying a moment ago about the idea that if we look at the opportunity to grow from our experiences and reach out to others, that's very helpful to remember. Thank you. And then finally, very important for today's discussion, what words of hope do you have for young people about the future? First, Katie, and then Nadia.
I think that my words of hope for the future are that to think about this experience as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to learn how to be resilient in the face of challenges, that this situation will come to an end, and that we can think about the experiences of learning to cope with this kind of adversity as being really opportunities for growth. And also a way to reflect on our lives. This experience might be changing the way we think about what we want to do in our life, what is important to us, what are our most key values, right? I think in many ways, the situation is causing us to really think about what is most important in life. And that is a wonderful opportunity to sort of use that to shape, ultimately what kind of career path you want to pursue, what kind of citizen and family member you want to be. And that if we think about the situation in that way, I think it really changes the way we feel about it. And that ultimately is very positive for mental health.
Thank you, Kate and Nadia.
I definitely agree with all of that. And I would sort of build on it by saying to young people and to my peers, remember that you are not alone and what you're feeling is fully valid. These are unprecedented, unpredictable, and very difficult times. So I would say just stay focused on what you have control over. Practice self-care, write journal reflections, go outside, revisit an old hobby, listen to music, do something active every day if you can, stay in touch with friends and family, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need more support or professional support. And overall, just take care of you and remember that this pandemic will eventually pass and we will get through it and be more resilient because of it.
Thank you so much, Nadia and Kate. Very, very helpful words and so inspiring to hear from both of you. Viewers, thank you too. If you have any questions for follow-up after this webcast is over, feel free to visit onemind.org/brainwaves over the next few days to post comments there. And Kate and Nadia can check that page as well to see if any comments appear over the next few days and respond. So thank you so much, Kate and Nadia. And now it's time for us to welcome superb young talent, a very gifted singer-songwriter and guitarist. Quinn Sullivan is here to perform the title track from his most recent album, Midnight Highway. Quinn, thank you so much and welcome to Brainwaves.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're honored to have you here. Yeah, it's astonishing how much you've accomplished at such a young age. You performed with Buddy Guy, B.B. King, released your own albums that you've co-written and written, and you performed in storied music venues all over the world. Tell us, how did you first meet a guitar?
How did I first meet a guitar? That's a great question. Well, basically, I picked up a guitar when I was 3. My parents were very, very big music lovers, and they always listened to music as I was growing up. And it was, I think, one Christmas, and they bought me a little. It wasn't really a toy guitar. It was a real guitar, but it was a kid's guitar. They used to sell these guitars called First Act guitars, which that was a company that made children's guitars, and they got me one for one Christmas, and I don't know, there's something about the guitar that just spoke to me that really nothing else at that time really did. Nothing else really did for me what the guitar did to me, like on an emotional level. So it was a very cool experience that I had at that age, and I just I didn't know it was going to be really a career for me. I kind of just was playing around with it because I was a kid. Obviously, I wasn't thinking, oh, this one day may be something I'll do forever. But it became, as I got older, at 5, 6, 7, and I started to take lessons and take it more seriously, it kind of became a thing where I was like, this is something that I have to do for the rest of my life, and I don't want to do anything else. Like, this is really what I want to do. So yeah, that's kind of the early years of playing for me. Yeah.
That's fascinating. It's like they talk about songs having a hook, and the hook in life for you was learning to play the guitar and kind of hooked you into that path.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a uniquely profound and soulful understanding of music for someone so young. Tell us, what has writing and studying music taught you?
Well, I think writing and studying music has taught me many things. I think the important thing that it's taught me is, to me, like, music is the universal language among all of us around the world. I think there's no other language, I think, that's more universal than the language of music. And I think it makes you feel something that, in my opinion, nothing else can make you feel. You know, when I was a kid, I would put on records and listen for hours on end and just absorb all of it. You know, I didn't really, I may not have understood the lyrical content that was being sung with you know, bands like, because I used to listen to bands, and I still do. I listen to bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and a lot of the you know, a lot of the rock and roll music that I was being exposed to by my parents, because they were big Grateful Dead fans and the Allman Brothers band. So I was just getting absorbed through all of it, and I would just sit down, sometimes even without a guitar, and just listen to it, and it just did something for me. Like I was saying before, it was an emotion that I just never really felt prior to that. So it was a really effective thing, you know, and it just, I think music just, I think it makes people have it makes me have a better understanding of the way people are, you know, and I try to write music that is universal and can speak to all different kinds of people, because to me, that's the ultimate goal. For me as an artist is to try to move people. And that's, I think any songwriter or any musician would tell you that, you know. I think when you're doing your job, you're kind of, you know, there's this thing that you do, and I see it a lot when I'm playing live, especially at shows, and I miss that. That's one of the things about this pandemic that's kind of, you know, not the best thing, is I can't be doing that. But you know, when I'm playing live, it's really it's an amazing thing to be able to look out and see people's faces and see people's reactions to things that you're doing. It's an effective thing, and especially the you know, it's almost like a community thing, because it's like everybody's in the room at the same time and literally just absorbing it all at the same time. So it's a really I've been certainly blessed, and it's been such an honor to be able to do that as a job, you know, and to be able to make music that hopefully, like I said, moves people in some way. And you know, that's my ultimate goal as an artist and a writer and a performer, to do that through my music. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And learning to being able to move people like that, it's like takes them into a different space, and it's so healthy to be moved like that by music, I find. Because like,
yeah, and you know, I find that, you know, because mental health is such a big issue right now, and what you guys were saying before, I mean, it's really fascinating to hear about all of that. And I think music, it really, like I was saying, people come up to me sometimes after shows, and you never really know someone's story until they say their story. I mean, you really wouldn't know, you know, what someone goes through just by seeing them, you know. And sometimes people just tell me these you know, these stories that they've gone through, people that they've lost, or you know, addiction. You know, a lot of times it's that they've overcome, and they're now sober. And they just, you know, they come up to me and say, you know, your music helps me do this, or your music helps me cope with stress, or your music helps me with this. So you really see it on a I think on a more personal level, especially when you're just talking face to face with these people that and fans that come up to me and just say that. So it puts it into perspective. You know, the job of the artist is not just to make music, but to also have these conversations with people that I think is important on a fan level, but also important on a personal level, and kind of puts your head in check on why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, your job is you're a healer, not just a musician, but a healer.
Totally.
Very
Absolutely.
important. Yeah. So Midnight Highway was released in 2017, and the song seems to be about perseverance, about continuing going on through darkness and light. That's my interpretation anyway. How did you come to write the song, and what was the inspiration behind the song Midnight Highway?
Well, I think the song has really brought on a new meaning to me. I feel like with this pandemic happening, I co-wrote this song with a great Nashville producer and songwriter. His name is Tom Hambridge, who produced Midnight Highway, and we wrote the song together. And I think at the time when we had written the song, it was more autobiographical and was written about being on the road and you know, the trials and tribulations that come with touring and being a working musician. And it's funny because I revisited the song today, when I was rehearsing it before this, because I hadn't played it in a while. And it, it seems like it has more of a universal theme, like the idea of, through all negativity that's forced on us every day around the world, you hopefully, will move ahead and things and push through and hopefully see a positive light at the end of the tunnel, which is, that's really, to me, what the chorus of the song is stating, is that, through, it's the lyric is, you got to keep moving, you got to keep rolling, and you got to keep riding down the midnight highway. And for me at the time, like I said, when it was written, it was more like a more literal standpoint, where it's like, you're actually like on a bus or in a van, and you're moving and you're on the road. But now to me, it can be more on, people can kind of perceive it through whatever experiences they're going through. Whether it's raising a family or keeping a job or maintaining a career, I think you can kind of relate it to anything in life. That I think with anything that you do, like you guys were talking about before, you have to keep pushing through sometimes, because life can get very challenging. And I know from my personal experience of just being a musician and being a working musician, and it's sometimes you can face some hard times sometimes. So yeah, it's but it's a song that I'm really proud of, and also a favorite of mine to perform live too. So
that's awesome. Thanks for writing the song and being willing to perform it for us.
Absolutely,
so take us down that midnight highway. Let's see what's at the other end.
All right, I'll give it a whirl. Let's do it.
All right, thank you.
In the heaven sky, I hear a black wave crashing home onto the crimson tide. Lady luck is leaving, the heart is bound to fly. When you feel that west wind, it's time to say goodbye. I gotta keep moving, I gotta keep rolling, I gotta keep riding down the midnight highway. Gotta keep moving, gotta keep rolling, I gotta keep riding down the midnight highway. Everywhere I look, I see some green grass. Yeah. Everywhere I look, I see your secret smile. The good days outnumber the bad days, and all roads lead to the highway. When's the next train leaving? I got a ticket in my hand. There's nothing like the feeling. I'm what you understand.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great performance. Thank you so much, Quinn.
Oh, thank
Really
you so
enjoyed
much.
that. Yeah.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That was really good.
That was
Yeah.
awesome.
I'm definitely moved. Definitely moved by that
Aw.
performance. Thank you.
Thank you guys very, very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Oh man, I just downloaded your album last night. I listened to it before, but I have it now. I'm going to keep listening to that song and the others to stay uplifted and keep on
Cool.
rolling down the highway. Thank you so much.
Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for watching. Thanks for participating, both Quinn and Nadia and Kate, in today's webcast. Look forward to seeing you on next week's webcast featuring Dr. Michelle Krask of UCLA on coping with anxiety during the pandemic and other related topics. Look forward to seeing you next week, and everybody have a great and safe week. Thank you.